The House of Eldred, written and read by Christopher Halton. The driveway to Cardwinder Mansion was a long and desolate path that wound through bleak northern moorland, climbing a hill and descending into a valley to reach a flat plateau below. In the distance stood the mansion, a gaunt Gothic visage, isolated and hostile to all who dared to cast their eyes upon its grey, weather-stained, wretched exterior. There was a darkness about it, as though Satan had hewn its stone-clad walls from the pit of hell. Yet here, in this wilderness of brooding grey skies, leafless trees, and the disconsolate caw of crows, stood this sole edifice to the mind of Sir William Eldred, a self-made man whose rise to wealth from poverty was a story painted in this ugly vista of nightmares. My name is Marcus Briggs. I am a successful writer and publisher who took a year-long lease on this 21-bedroom property. The appeal for me was that its driveway was 10 miles long across rugged terrain, ensuring that even the most determined callers would be easily dissuaded from coming there. The isolation of the mansion and its desolate surroundings all contributed to a sense of seclusion that I craved. Hopefully, this would give me time to focus on a novel I was writing and give me a break from the outside world. And so, despite my misgivings, I was determined to find the peace I sought in this desolate place. Arriving by a hired horse-drawn hansom cab, the driver, a weaselly-looking man of a dubious distinction named Morrison, charged me double to take me here from the nearest railway station, some 15 miles distant, as no others would venture near the place due to its reputation as a place of haunted evil. This reputation stemmed mainly from the story of Eldred, a man locals alleged had made a deal with the devil to attain wealth and power from a humble and very impoverished background. As I recall, his rise to prominence was quite meteoric. He had begun his life as a child labourer in a Yorkshire coal mine and eventually came to own it. In more respectable circles, his story was often framed as one of resilience and determination, showing an ability to overcome insurmountable odds. Despite being illiterate until he taught himself to read and write, he possessed an ability for making money and seized every opportunity to do so for his own personal advancement. These profits provided a platform to acquire many more coalfields, and his investment portfolio enabled him to buy gilt-edged bonds in many blue-chip companies of early Edwardian Britain. Of course, to achieve greatness, he walked over the lives of the many who shared his common background. His workers were poorly paid, and many died hauling coal from deep rickety shafts, where a wretched safety record led to many deaths but bigger rewards. This neither worried nor concerned his wealthy investors, and by offering them a premium dividend on their investments, he soon won a knighthood for his services to industry. Cardwinder Mansion was an epitaph for his achievements, and it was felt that the evil of his life was deeply imbued within its fabric. Although he died in mysterious circumstances some 10 years ago, locals believed Eldred was still very much in residence. Tales of his after-death presence were a lingering mystery that added to the mansion's evil allure. His cousins now owned the mansion, for he remained a spinster. They were legally obliged to maintain and staff the building by writ of a codicil in his will until a buyer could be found. As nobody had stepped forward to acquire this grim mausoleum, the family was happy to rent it to me at a much discounted rate to reduce their overheads. Now that I had finally arrived at the entrance, Morrison was insistingly keen to dispose of me and my luggage as the wintry afternoon soon drew into the veil of darkness. As I watched a wild, fearful-faced Morrison crack his whip and vanish into the distance, leaving me and 2 large trunk cases behind, a cold breeze blew in from across the moors as I struggled to pull the cases from the gravel drive to a large, imposing bronze door, which had a strange ornamentation of 2 dragons whose tails formed the doorframe on either side. Their heads were twisted at the top, meeting in the middle as they peered down at me with distaste for my presence. The mansion certainly exuded a palpable sense of dread, as if it were alive and watching my every move, and the air was thick with an unsettling pervasiveness. As I was about to announce my arrival on a huge, heavy brass-ring door knocker, the door swung open with an almost grinding growl. I was presented by a thinning, grey-haired, middle-aged man, smartly dressed in a dark tail jacket, grey trousers, a tie to match, and a white wing-collared shirt. He bowed slightly and smiled, his polite demeanour contrasting the mansion's foreboding atmosphere. "Good afternoon, sir. You are expected." He then turned behind him and clicked his fingers, whereupon two young footmen quickly rushed out and carried my cases as I was escorted inside. Introducing himself as Stimpson, the butler, an imposing man with an imperious face that seemed guarded to secrecy, he closed the heavy door with a little effort. A hint of suspicion overshadowed his polite demeanour as he looked me over. I felt he was not entirely pleased with my arrival, but maintained his professional bearing, leaving me with a palpable sense of unease. "Well, sir, we are pleased to make your acquaintance, and I gather you will be our guest for the foreseeable future." "Yes," I replied, feeling relieved as I took off my hat and coat and passed them to the butler. Unlike the bleak and forbidding exterior, the hall's interior was surprisingly bright and airy, with white and black marble floor tiles and white painted walls. However, this brightness was starkly contrasted by a grim-faced hall portrait of an old man sat in a heavy oaken chair, set against a bleak-looking background of a mine pier with an entrance spewing out grimy-faced pit workers. Stimpson noticed my curiosity as he hung my clothing on a mahogany hall stand and remarked, "Oh, that's Sir William Eldred, sir, and painted a few years before his passing. He felt very connected to his mining interests and commissioned this portrait to reflect that." "What was he like? I mean to say, he appears quite severe there." Stimpson smiled. "It's best not to talk ill of the dead, sir." His smile seemed forced, and I could sense a hint of suspicion in his eyes. He interjected before I could press for more information. "Now, come along, sir. Dinner will be ready soon." He then escorted me up a beautiful white Carrara marble staircase, lined with gilt railings crowned with an ebony rail, which swept up to an upper carpeted corridor, lined with heavy-looking oak doors, framed within a white-walled corridor displaying a variety of mounted heads of stuffed lions, tigers, boars, and other such game that Stimpson told me were shot by Sir William on safari in years past. In some ways, these doors reminded me of condemned men's cells and the animals, an allegory of their victims. But despite this generated feeling of lost hope, the corridor was brightly lit, as was the rest of the house, with the electric lighting. Eldred had installed a water turbine generator on a nearby fast-flowing river that supplied all the needs required by the house. Stimpson stopped at a door which was to be my bedroom during my stay. Upon entering this ensuite bedroom, I was impressed with the lush furnishings and antique mahogany furniture. The carpets were a variety of beautiful Persian machard rugs, which gave colour and depth, and the bed was an old colonial American four-poster that Eldred had picked up in New England. He may not have been a charming man in life, but he had excellent tastes. This room felt very welcoming, with that sentiment underscored by a warming fire in the hearth. My earlier misgivings about the house dissipated slightly as I realized that Eldred had deliberately created a gaunt and hostile exterior to deter others from the hidden gems of its more pleasant interior, almost akin, I thought, to a beautiful pearl hidden inside an oyster shell. Of course, this observation was more influenced by emotion than fact. After ensuring the house staff put away my belongings neatly and tidily, I dressed for dinner. I then joined Stimpson downstairs as he escorted me to the dining room, a rather large, elegant, elongated room with a well-polished mahogany table for 20 people. Of course, there was only one table setting, as I, as the solitary guest, sat at the head of the table. The room was adorned by obviously acquired portraits of the great and good, with the largest being another painting in a gold gilt frame depicting Eldred in a more arrogant pose, looking directly down upon the table, which was, for my satisfaction, displayed from behind my back and not staring at me in front. Waiting upon me was a maid called Ellie, and Stimpson, who served a 3-course dinner with civility which I immensely enjoyed. The main course was roasted pheasant freshly shot on the estate by the gamekeeper, a man called Roberts. After eating dinner, I left after complimenting the chef to return to my room, where I relaxed over a glass of brandy before bed. Superficially, I felt very accommodated here, but inside me, my subconscious felt less enthusiastic. I later retired to bed and had a pleasant sleep, and the following morning Stimpson awoke me and served me breakfast. I asked Stimpson if there was a morning newspaper, and as he collected my tray, he smiled and said, "We have no such deliveries here, sir, of any newspaper, just the weekly delivery of mail and nothing else." As he left, he smiled and said, "After all, sir, you are here to enjoy isolation from the world. Would a newspaper not be contrary to those wishes? In his time, Sir William banned the press as, like you, he wanted perfect peace. I am sure you can appreciate this sentiment." He opened the door and turned to me. "If there is anything else, sir, please pull the servant cord by your bed, and someone will be attendant upon you." With the gentle swing of the door, he was gone. Having enjoyed a bath, I dressed for the day, after which the maid Ellie, who served me the previous night, came in to make my bed. She told me that she had worked at the house for some years, and was in fact the daughter of Roberts the gamekeeper, and lived with her family in a tied estate cottage nearby. A slim, attractive young woman in her mid-twenties, with neatly tied auburn hair, she diligently performed her duties. However, she seemed as though something more prescient weighed upon her mind, and her polite responses harboured something within her that I couldn't quite put my finger upon. Her oddness and that of Stimpson I put down to living in the isolation of the surrounding moors and this weirdly built mansion, and so I put these impressions to one side. After completing her tasks, including cleaning the fireplace and changing the bed linen, she curtsied me and hurriedly left. My curiosity about this house was growing, and I felt compelled to spend the day exploring the property. I initially went to the kitchen, where I met the chef, Mrs. Roberts, Ellie's mother, and John Roberts' wife, the gamekeeper. She was a well-built lady in her mid-50s, wearing a large white apron. She was busy preparing lunch with the assistance of the 2 young footmen, her sons Albert and James, who were around 20 and 22. All were very much like Ellie in temperament, and although polite when questioned, they had that same seed of uncertainty about them. I asked Mrs. Roberts, "I am surprised this house has a cook, considering it has no owner to serve." She turned her head to me while dismembering a chicken for lunch and said, "Well, sir, I am, if you like, the house's caretaker, and I would normally only serve food for Mr. Stimpson and the family. So you being here adds another layer to my daily duties, and hopefully you will find the peace and tranquillity here much to your liking." She briefly paused while placing the chicken joints into a pan and said, after rubbing her hands on her apron, "You may have heard small talk from the locals about the house, which I can assure you is complete nonsense. People say that Sir William made a pact with the devil and that he is sometimes seen briefly and then disappears." She smiled and continued, "I think Sir William started some of these rumours to keep people away, and I must say it works other than your good self and the Weekly Post." I asked, "Did you know Sir William?" She lost her smile and replied, "He was a hard taskmaster, sir. You must excuse me now, as lunch will be ready in 2 hours." Again, no sooner had I touched on any talk involving Eldred than the staff here quickly changed the subject. I thanked Mrs. Roberts for her excellent cooking skills and left her and her sons, but I realized the more I spoke to the Roberts family or the butler, the more I was convinced that regarding Eldred there were more questions than answers that remained to be answered. The following day I decided to walk on the moors. It was a warm morning, and the normal greyness of the landscape had a certain vibrancy of a greenish-brown hue as the sun-cleansing light swept from behind a heavy cloak of dark clouds that drifted silently across the myriad of stone walls and stunted trees below. It was, to be said, a harsh, unforgiving prospect, with the occasional escarpments that dipped below the undulations of the hills, giving some shelter from the frequent and savage winds. In the distance I chanced upon an elderly man standing and staring at me and the house. I knew he was elderly by his hunched body, with one hand supporting his weight on a walking stick. He wore a deerstalker hat and a matching cloak, and he reminded me of old Eldred from the portraits in the house. But why was he there, just standing and staring? I decided to walk over to speak to him, but was shocked to suddenly feel a hand on my shoulder, which caused me to turn around sharply. Looking at me in the face was a man wearing a flat cap and a hacking jacket with breeches. He looked severe, with a thin moustache that underlined that sentiment. He introduced himself as John Roberts, the gamekeeper, and over his shoulder was a brace of tied pheasants and a double-barreled shotgun in his hand. His face was weather-worn, with deep creases which foretold a harsh life in the elements. I turned around from this distraction, but the old man was gone. Turning back to Roberts, I said, "Did you see him?" "Who, sir?" I responded more sharply, "The old man." Roberts replied, "Only you and me, sir, nobody else. I had been out this past hour shooting game for dinner, and other than yourself today, I never saw a living soul." I retorted, "But he was there wearing a deerstalker hat, cape and—" Roberts interrupted me and said, "A walking stick, sir." "Well, yes, indeed, so you did see him." Somewhat nervously, Roberts replied, "You have described Sir William Eldred, sir. He used to dress like that when on the moors. But you couldn't have seen him or anyone else, as he is dead, and you are the only guest in this isolated place." Seizing the opportunity to press further regarding Eldred, I asked Roberts, "Can I ask you some questions about Sir William?" Nervously he replied, "You may, sir, but I cannot say whether I have all the answers." "Well," I continued, "whenever I speak to your family or Stimpson the butler about this man, they appear unwilling to discuss him, almost fearful, I would say." He stood silent momentarily and replied, "Sir William left a strong imprint in that house, so strong that you become convinced he is watching your every move. I have seen him occasionally around the house, and I know my wife has too. He just suddenly appears and then disappears." "So," I said, "could I have just seen him on the moor?" He looked around cautiously and replied, "You may have done, sir, but I have never seen him outside, but I can say he looks as real as you and me." I then asked about his reported death, as all I could ascertain was that he died in mysterious circumstances. Having been pushed to reply, Roberts told me Sir William was on business in the Caribbean when he died. He was in Haiti to discuss a business venture when he collapsed dead in his hotel room. Apparently he was buried on the island with no memorial to him back home, although a death certificate was issued, which was accepted by the authorities. Thereafter the estate was passed into the hands of his cousins. I thanked Roberts and we parted company. I felt this required further information, and in the coming weeks I wrote several letters to both the Haitian Embassy and the Colonial Office in London, who both confirmed Eldred's death. However, the cause of death was never medically verified by an autopsy, with both authorities accepting that he died of a heart attack. This was also confirmed in a Times newspaper obituary for 1910, which added a crucial piece of information that Eldred was found dead by his butler Stimpson. I later caught up with Stimpson in the library, where I touched on Eldred's death. I was convinced that I had either seen Eldred as a ghost or that he was actually still alive. Stimpson was formally polite and less engaging, and refused to be drawn on detail. He confirmed the business trip and Eldred's death, but could not add further detail, other than the fact that he was buried in Le Grand Cimetière, Port-au-Prince. He later produced a photograph of the interment to confirm this. He then asked why, as a guest here, I would be so interested in his death. I shared my possible sighting of the old man on the moor without mentioning my meeting with Roberts. He looked at me quizzically and said, "How curious, sir. There have been reports of Sir William's ghost inside the house, but of course, as any intelligent mind would realise, this is nonsense stuff." He then left to attend to other duties in the house, but added that he was always available if I wanted further details. I became less convinced of Stimpson's explanation, which I suspected was too convenient. Having the date of Eldred's death, I acted on a hunch. I had a friend in London who worked for a major shipping company with many links within the trade to other companies in operation across the globe. I shared all relevant information with him by letter and asked if he could trace any shipments from Port-au-Prince to England over the period from Eldred's death. A few weeks passed when he wrote back to confirm that the French registered cargo ship SS Ange de la Mer carried a large crated consignment under Eldred's name to a small port on the Yorkshire coast, which arrived a few weeks after his death. The crate was then transported to Mr. Eustace Stimpson at Cardwinder Mansion, who signed and took receipt of it. The manifest claimed it contained personal effects and furniture upon which Stimpson had previously paid import duty. Why would Eldred have bought furniture if he was on a business trip? That made no sense. On the outside chance, it could have been antique French Empire furniture, but I saw no evidence of that in the house. Stimpson knew more than he admitted, and I resolved to find out more. I later caught up with Roberts, the gamekeeper out on the moors setting animal traps, and asked him about this. He replied, "Well, let me think. Yes, a huge crate was delivered which took all our efforts to move. I suggested to Stimpson that it might have been easier to unpack it outside, but he refused, so we carried the crate through a service entrance, which led to the cellar where it was left in storage. Stimpson had a key and locked the door after delivery. That's about it. He never discussed it again." I inquired, "Do you trust Stimpson?" "No," he answered. "There is something dark about that man." I thanked Roberts for his honesty, and he agreed to keep our conversations on these matters private. I returned to the house, mulling over all that Roberts had told me and my inquiries to date. Curiouser and curious still, I thought. What would Stimpson's motives be in this regard? I could not see how he would benefit other than the possibility he smuggled something illegally into the country and used Eldred's name to dissuade customs from looking too deeply. But I had to admit this was all speculation without a shred of proof. But without a doubt, Stimpson was up to no good. When I returned to the house, I searched the library for clues. After all, what better hiding place for a depository of documentation than a library? After an hour of pulling out each book to see whether anything was concealed within their pages, I came across a large manila envelope buried at the back of some books on mining. Carefully removing the sealed envelope, I concealed it inside my jacket and returned to my room. That evening, having earlier cancelled dinner, I elected to remain in my room with sandwiches, on the pretext of writing my novel, which was left by the wayside because of all that was happening in this house of mystery and intrigue. I carefully removed the envelope's contents and was surprised to see that it contained a blueprint of the house. Unbeknownst to me, hidden servant corridors in every room were clearly shown, with one in the library leading to the cellar. What luck, I thought. Now I can secretly enter without the knowledge of Stimpson, or indeed anyone else. I also thought Eldred was still alive and using these hidden corridors to appear and quickly disappear to avoid detection. But again, I had only suspicion and no evidence to support that. There were so many gaps in this story. Hopefully, the cellar can reveal its secrets and solve this mystery. Stimpson was clearly up to something, And so, after Stimpson had retired for the night and the Roberts family had returned to their cottage, I took my flashlight into the library. According to the plans, a secret lever was concealed on the left side of a bookcase, allowing it to swing open and provide access to a hidden area. Based on the diagram, the entrance was small, but I quickly located the lever disguised as a protruding screw. Pressing the head of the screw released a catch, and a section of the bookcase swung open. Luckily, an electric light switch on the inside illuminated a flight of stone steps leading down into a vast chamber marked as the cellar. As I flicked the switch on, the door closed behind me, and I stealthily descended the staircase into the basement. The brightly lit cellar revealed various boxes and discarded furniture stacked around the chamber, along with another opening that led into a small room or antechamber. It was here that I experienced the greatest shock, which almost made me revulse, though I knew I needed to remain quiet to avoid waking the butler 2 floors above. There was the body of Eldred, who stood propped against the wall like a lifeless doll. His eyes were open but opaque and blind, wide and staring into nothingness, while his body appeared stiff and erect. I felt for a pulse, but his flesh was cold and clammy, and I opined that this man was a corpse, yet he looked quite alive with no decay to his flesh. But how? I carefully retreated from the basement. As I reached the top of the stairs, I turned off the light switch which opened the secret door. I ensured that it was then firmly closed and retired to my bedroom. I could not sleep, no matter how I tried. I knew my room had a secret corridor, and I was deeply unnerved that somehow Stimpson would discover my trespass and deal with me in the manner of Eldred. I also knew Ellie would be in at 8 a.m. to serve my breakfast. Sure enough, dawn came, and an hour later there was the daily tap on the door as Ellie came in to give me my food on a silver serving tray. I, of course, pretended to have been asleep, but Ellie noticed my bleary eyes and said concernedly, "Did you not sleep well, sir?" I replied, "Oh, I had a bad dream, Ellie, and could not sleep much, but I thank you for asking and request you tell the others not to disturb me until lunch, as I need to catch up with some sleep." She smiled, gave me a customary curtsy, and left after gently closing the door. After 3 hours of sleep, I realized that Eldred and Stimpson had been to a country noted for reviving the dead into what is called zombies through the use of the black arts. There seemed a possibility based on Eldred's physical state that some devil-worshipping voodoo cult may have brought him back as the living dead, and that Stimpson was controlling him for some nefarious purpose. But for what reason, I did not know. I decided to enlist John Roberts's help by showing him Eldred's body, which would convince him to help me stop Stimpson's evil work. Later that day I found Roberts in the stable block area, and without going into the necessity of speech, I explained everything I had discovered. He thought my suggestion was preposterous, but agreed to accompany me to see for himself. He said he would bring his double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun for safety, as we would never know what would be likely laid in store on our arrival. At midnight we met surreptitiously in the library and entered the cellars together via the secret library staircase. When we got there, Eldred's body was still propped up in the antechamber, and as we both stood there looking at Eldred's body, we were unaware that footsteps had entered the room behind us, until we heard a slight cough. We both turned and saw a grinning Stimpson, who said rather smugly, "What a detective you turned out to be, sir," he continued. "You have got all of this wrong. I am actually Eldred controlling Stimpson's body." I retorted, "You are completely crazy, Stimpson. Eldred's body is propped up against the wall." "Yes, that is my body, and I am now inhabiting Stimpson's body. While we were in Haiti, I knew I had not long to live, and I made a pact with a satanic voodoo cult that allowed me to transfer my soul into my servant's body. And here I am, and soon you and Roberts will become the undead and work under my command. I can even control my own zombified body, which you saw on the moors, but for any prying eyes, both of you will die as a murderer and suicide with Robert's shotgun." He then started to chant in French, saying, "J'ordonne esprit des morts d'exécuter mes ordres et de prendre la vie de ces hommes," and threw some small bones and animal blood from a phial onto the floor. Robert suddenly became taut and his eyes widely fixated on his shotgun, which he desperately tried to resist from pointing at me. But he could not resist. Eldred's will was strong and too powerful. Before the weapon was turned entirely on me, I deflected in terror the barrel with my hands, and the gun unexpectedly fired into Eldred's body. With that, the body of Eldred started to burn, as the entire building above began to rumble and shake, as though this too was in its final death throes, causing masonry to come crashing down around us. Stimson became frozen, and both his and Eldred's bodies were consumed by flames that emanated from their chests. By this time, Roberts had come to his senses, and we fled safely from the cellar and out into the grounds. At the same time, behind us, the evil edifice to Eldred's power started to collapse into a pile of rubble, which was swallowed up by a giant flaming cavernous cauldron that appeared in the ground around the house. The final remnants of the Cardwinder Mansion disappeared forever and were finally buried. It was though Satan himself had taken back everything that was once bestowed on the creature that was William Eldred. Some weeks later, authorities launched an official inquiry into the mansion's destruction. Engineers discovered that below the mansion, the ground was riddled with mining tunnels abandoned by Eldred many years earlier, and the inquiry agreed that the collapse of these workings caused the mansion to fall into them. The bodies of either man were never discovered, and officially only Stimson was missing. Of course, nobody dared tell what had happened, and the inquiry was closed. I appreciated the irony of the occasion where Eldred destroyed his beloved mansion through his avarice, which forever buried him and his epitaph for eternity. And here a fitting end and the conclusion of my story. The end.